Okie dokie, everyone. Last section of the video. I'll keep this a little bit shorter. I think we get the sense of some of the changes in the map and some of the ways in which the Treaty of Versailles has an impact on shifts in Europe in terms of new roles for new countries. And certainly there's going to be, as we see in the conference that we're doing in class, that there's a great deal of societies that would have liked the possibility of becoming independent and drawing new borders. And in most cases, it does not happen. We're seeing really self-determination in the spaces that the Central Powers were located. Okay, so just an overview of some of this. This was the slide that we were noting, and just so you can see some of the interests that Britain and France had in the Middle East, and there's a great deal of tension. And I think, as I was noting when the video ended just before, this time often is one where we see Britain particularly involved in a variety of competing promises. One of the things Britain is going to promise is to, Arab peoples a degree of independence, in return for, and this is where we see Prince Faisal in the discussion in class, but in exchange for Arab participation in the war effort against the Ottoman Empire, there's a promise, that, for example, Syria might be, independent. And there's actually a research project that happens where people are interviewed about what they would like to see. And people in Syria do note that they would like to be independent. And people in Palestine note that they would like to be independent. And despite some of that, there does become multiple promises. Palestine is also promised perhaps for some use by Zionist causes for people of Jewish descent. And so there's multiple promises that Britain in particular will get itself into. And then the Treaty of Versailles with the mandate seems to overdo some of the earlier promises. So there's a lot of, grief as a result of the decision of the mandates. And in addition to that, it goes against the 14 points and some of the provisions regarding secret treaties and imperialism and things like that. So, this gain of British and French mandates, puts both of those countries in control of really significant areas of the Middle East and puts a great number of people, under the control of Britain and France. The idea of the mandate is, for the purpose of suggesting that some peoples, even though they have self-determination, don't have the ability to rule themselves yet and will in the future. So the mandates, really are supposed to enable self-determination at some later date, and that's not really the way it works out. The Treaty of Versailles does come to an end on June 28th when this is where Germany will sign this after much debate within Germany, resignations of leaders in Germany, new government, the Weimar Republic that's going to be forming in Germany. But the end of World War I ends up being very celebrated across the world. And of course, in Germany, there's going to be a great deal of debate, discussion, and pushback, seeing this as a dictated peace, something that the Germans didn't have control over, and it will not be accepted lightly, creates a lot of political tension within Germany. Couple of one last question: the United States, upon the ending of the treaty, President Wilson comes back. This is now after months. He had come home once and then went back to Paris. But when he comes home, he will present the Treaty of Versailles to the Senate. This becomes a great deal of contention in the U.S. Senate. The big thing for the Senate is considering the League of Nations. This creates a General Assembly of 27 nations. There would be a Court of International Justice. Arbitration and economic sanctions would be used to settle conflicts. So essentially, it's like a couple of tools are put in place, to deal with conflicts that existed. And most importantly, Article 10. Article 10 asks nations to protect each other's independence. This becomes a really significant issue. Article 10 says members of the League undertake to respect and preserve as against external aggression, the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members of the League. This kind of suggests that should there be some sort of future issue in, say, Europe, the United States would have to come to the aid of the League, and it's that particular issue that members of the Senate are going to question. If we do look at some of the places where the 14 points maybe do become fulfilled, the evacuation and restoration of Belgium, so Germany does leave Belgium, evacuation and restoration of the French lands, including return of Alsace and Lorraine, and then establishment of an independent Poland. Some of the other things that are here, we can see are not fulfilled at all, especially, kind of looking at kind of the list of the 14 points from 1 to 6, and some things are going to be very much kind of compromised, right? There does end up being an establishment of a League of Nations, but it is going to be a compromised version of the League of Nations. And of course, Italy will gain some land, not all of the land it wanted. There's a few other compromises, okay? Some of the big major provisions of the Treaty of Versailles that get signed by Germany, the League of Nations will exist. Germany and Russia are excluded. Territorial losses, Germany returns Alsace and Lorraine to France. All of its overseas colonies in Africa and the Pacific get, kind of placed with particular members of the Allied powers. The French border is going to be extended to the west bank of the Rhine River. Military restrictions, some of these are very specific. We're going to see the end of, sorry, I was thinking that something else was going to come up there and it didn't. Some of the military restrictions will include limits on the size of the army to like 100,000 soldiers. There's going to be, the sinking of a great amount. In fact, Germans do it themselves at Scapa Flow. They don't want to see the Allies do it. So there's a whole bunch of military equipment that's also limited, and no access to submarines or any air force for the Germans. And then, of course, the war guilt clause and reparations. Okay, Wilson doesn't sign the treaty because the Senate has the power to ratify the treaty, and the Senate does not ratify the treaty. What are some of the issues? The U.S. public largely did support the treaty, and Wilson makes a campaign all across the country to gain public support. The Senate does not wish to sign off on the League of Nations, and there's large-scale debate in the U.S. Senate. Some senators, like Henry Cabot Lodge, will ask for changes, in particular to that Clause 10, and try to weaken some of the role of the League of Nations so that there's not this obligation for every country to come in, if there's a conflict that ensues a few countries. Some of the Senate was mild reservationists. They really wanted some small changes to the League of Nations. Strong reservationists, this would have been like Henry Cabot Lodge, who on a personal level hates Woodrow Wilson with a passion. Woodrow Wilson hated Henry Cabot Lodge, couldn't find, two individuals more opposed to each other, but Henry Cabot Lodge really wanted to exclude a lot of the language in Article 10. And then there are irreconcilables, individuals that don't want the U.S. to join the League. It's arguable that, had Wilson been able to compromise, he probably could have kept the reservationists on board and maybe lost the irreconcilables and probably would have enabled the U.S. to be involved in the Treaty of Versailles. Wilson refuses to compromise, okay, something that he refuses to do. He, doesn't want to compromise. He goes on a large-scale campaign throughout the country, and Wilson put so much work into this campaign, he actually has a stroke, has a series of headaches. He cannot continue, so he's rushed home, and he's really largely incapacitated. It is likely that in today's time, we'd see like the 26th Amendment invoked, and we would have a president who was out of commission. But this is kind of largely kept from the American public, and his wife largely is causing is making the decisions and signing things and things like that. So he was very, very much refusing to compromise. His wife becomes essentially the de facto president, and it's something that comes out in the press much later how sick he was. The United States never signs the Treaty of Versailles, is never part of the League of Nations, and ultimately in 1920, we see a Republican win. All of the efforts of Wilson and kind of that entire progressive campaign gets very much tainted by some of this debate over the League of Nations. This is the outcome of the 1920 election, and we move into a very not only isolationist, but a time period of a great deal of movement to what's called a return to normalcy, but a very less active government in the economy and in a variety of other affairs. So kind of a movement away from what we had seen in American government in the earlier time period of the 1900s, with America involved in imperialism and America involved in a lot of hands-on things in the economy through the progressive era. A lot of that is going to reverse, okay? Be well, everyone. There's a section on the study guide that does note some of the effects of the Treaty of Versailles. We didn't get to a lot of that in class, so I will not have a lot of that in the quiz. Note that there will be some information about the U.S. Lack of support for the Treaty of Versailles in the Senate, some of the debate in the Senate. Okay? Be well. I'll see you on Monday.